Han Sol stared at the red warning light flashing on his command console and felt his stomach drop. The bridge of the Taeguk was quiet, except for the steady hum of life support systems and the soft beeping that meant an urgent message was waiting. Outside the main view screen, the planet Kepler 442c hung like a blue-green jewel against the starfield, its surface rich with the rare minerals that could power human colonies for decades to come. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council," Minho said from his science station. The young officer's voice was calm, but Han Sol could hear the worry underneath. Priority transmissions from the Council meant trouble, and trouble usually meant humans were about to get blamed for something. "Put it through," Han Sol said, straightening in his captain's chair. The main screen flickered and changed from the peaceful view of the planet to the angular face of Ambassador Veltar. The Etherean's blue skin seemed paler than usual, and his normally steady voice carried an edge of nervousness. "Captain Han Sol of the human vessel Taeguk, you are hereby ordered to cease all mining and exploration activities in the Kepler system immediately," Veltar began without any greeting. "By Emergency Decree 7749 of the Galactic Council, all Deathworlder species are to report to designated assembly points for protective relocation." The words hit Han Sol like a physical blow. Protective relocation was just a fancy way of saying imprisonment. He had heard whispers about growing tensions between some council members and the so-called Deathworld species, but this was beyond anything he had expected. "What exactly does protective relocation mean, Ambassador?" Han Sol asked, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. Veltar's eyes shifted away from the camera. "Recent aggressive actions by the Saurian Empire have created a dangerous situation for species from high-gravity death worlds. The Council has determined that for your own safety, humans, along with the Keks and Mordai, must be moved to secure locations until the crisis passes." Su Jin, the ship's diplomatic officer, leaned forward from her station. "Ambassador, what aggressive actions? We haven't received any reports of Saurian military movements." "The details are classified," Veltar replied quickly. "What matters is that the decision has been made. All human vessels are to report to Station Omega-7 within 72 hours. Any refusal to comply will be considered an act of rebellion against the Galactic Council." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Han Sol stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his mind racing. In his 15 years of service with the human space navy, he had seen plenty of political maneuvering, but this felt different. This felt like fear. "Captain," Taewan's gruff voice broke the silence. The Marine commander had been standing quietly near the back of the bridge, but now he stepped forward, his weathered face grim. "This smells like a setup. Since when does the Council care about protecting Deathworlders? Last month they were complaining that we were expanding too fast." Minho was already working at his console, his fingers flying over the controls. "Captain, I'm scanning all available databases for information about this emergency decree. There's almost nothing here. No mention of Saurian aggression, no reports of attacks on Deathworlder colonies. It's like this decree appeared out of nowhere." "What about the other Deathworld species?" Han Sol asked. "Have the Keks or Mordai responded to this order?" "Checking now," Su Jin said, her diplomatic training showing as she accessed the interspecies communication networks. After a few minutes, her face went pale. "Captain, according to the diplomatic channels, both the Keks hive clusters and the Mordai crystal cities have already agreed to the relocation. Their representatives issued statements saying they welcome the Council's protection." Taewan snorted in disgust. "That doesn't sound like any Keks or Mordai I've ever met. Those species didn't survive on death worlds by being easy to push around." Han Sol stood up and began pacing behind his chair, a habit he had developed when thinking through difficult problems. Something about this situation felt wrong on every level. The Saurian Empire had been quiet for months, their aggressive expansion seemingly stopped by a series of trade agreements with the Outer Rim worlds. Why would they suddenly become a threat serious enough to justify imprisoning entire species? "Minho, what do you know about Station Omega-7? Han Sol asked. The science officer's fingers danced across his console. "It's a deep space facility. In the neutral zone, Captain. Officially, it's listed as a research station, but the specifications show massive detention facilities and minimal scientific equipment. If I had to guess, I'd say it was built specifically for holding large populations. How convenient, Taewon muttered. A prison station just happens to be ready when they need to lock up all the Deathworlders. Sujin looked up from her station, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of worry. Captain, we have to consider the possibility that the Council is acting in good faith. If there really is a threat from the Saurian Empire, refusing their protection could put human colonies at risk. And if they're lying, Taewon shot back. What if this is just an excuse to grab our territory while we're locked up in their protective custody? Humans have claimed more habitable worlds in the last decade than any other species. That makes some council members nervous. Hansol stopped pacing and looked out at the planet hanging in space before them. Humans had found this world, after months of searching, had risked their lives surveying it, had invested resources and time into understanding its potential. Now the council wanted them to just walk away and trust that everything would be fine. Sir, the communications officer, Jae-min, spoke up from his station. I'm receiving personal messages from human colonies across this sector. Word about the decree is spreading fast and people are scared. Some colony governors are asking for instructions. What are the other human fleet commanders saying? Hansol asked. Mixed responses so far, Jae-min replied. Captain Lee Na of the Busan is preparing to comply with the order. Commander Park Jun of the Incheon is requesting clarification. But Captain Dong Hyun of the Seoul is calling for an emergency meeting of all human fleet officers. Hansol felt the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. Whatever decision he made here would affect not just his crew, but potentially all of humanity's future in the galaxy. If he complied with the Council's order, humans might find themselves trapped in a situation they couldn't escape. If he refused, he could be starting a war that humanity might not be able to win. Minho, how many human vessels are currently in this sector? Hansol asked. 17, sir. Everything from exploration ships like ours to colony transports and a few military escorts. And how many council ships? 3 that we can detect, Captain. All diplomatic vessels with minimal armament. Taewon stepped closer to Hansol's chair. Captain, whatever we decide, we need to decide it fast. Every minute we stay here makes us look more defiant to the Council. Hansol looked around at his crew, these people who had followed him across the galaxy, who trusted him to make the right choices. Sujin was right that the Council might be trying to protect them, but Taewon was also right that this could be a trap designed to remove humans. From the galactic stage, Jae-min, open a channel to all human vessels in the sector, Hansol said finally, and make sure it's on an open frequency that the Council ships can monitor. Channel open, Captain. Hansol took a deep breath. He thought about all the human colonies that had been built through hard work and determination, all the families that had risked everything to make new homes among the stars. He thought about the other species that had been helped by human medicine, human technology, human courage. He thought about what it meant to be from a death world, to be someone who had learned to survive when everything was trying to kill you. This is Captain Hansol to all human vessels, he said, his voice carrying across space to 17 ships and thousands of people. I'm sure you've all received the Council's emergency decree by now. I want you to know that I will be attending the emergency session at Concordia Prime to discuss this situation directly with the Council members. He paused, knowing that his next words would change everything. But I will be going there as a representative of free humans, not as a prisoner accepting relocation. We will hear what the Council has to say, and then we will make our own decision about what's best for humanity. The bridge was silent as Hansol ended the transmission. He had just told the galaxy that humans would not simply obey orders, that they would demand explanations and make their own choices. It was either the beginning of a new chapter in human independence or the first step toward a war none of them were ready to fight. The massive orbital station Concordia Prime hung in space like a metal flower, its 5 arms reaching out from a central hub that housed the Galactic Council chambers. Hansol had visited the station twice before, both times for routine diplomatic meetings that had gone smoothly. This time felt completely different as his shuttle approached the docking bay. "Captain, I'm reading unusual energy signatures from the station," Yejin said from the pilot's seat. The young tactical officer had insisted on flying the shuttle personally, and Han Sol was glad to have someone he trusted at the controls. "There are more ships docked here than usual, and some of them are running active scanning systems." Through the shuttle's view screen, Han Sol could see the sleek forms of Council security vessels positioned around the station like guards. Their weapon systems were powered down, but their sensors were definitely active, tracking every ship that approached. "They're nervous," Han Sol observed. "That's interesting." The docking process went smoothly, but as soon as Han Sol and Yejin stepped off their shuttle, they were met by a full security escort. 6 tall Luxari guards in their flowing robes surrounded them, their luminous eyes showing no emotion. Leading them was Security Chief Kontal, a massive Vorthak whose forearms and armored hide made him look like a walking weapon. "Captain Han Sol," Kontal rumbled in his deep voice, "you will come with us directly to the council chamber. No stops, no communications." "Of course," Han Sol replied calmly, though he noticed that Yejin's hand was resting casually near her sidearm. "I wouldn't want to keep the council waiting." As they walked through the station's corridors, Han Sol was struck by how empty they seemed. Usually Concordia Prime bustled with activity, diplomats and traders and tourists from dozens of species moving through the wide hallways. Today the corridors were nearly deserted, and the few beings they did see hurried past with their eyes down. "Something's wrong here," Yejin whispered as they passed a sealed bulkhead that usually led to the station's commercial district. "Many things are wrong here," Han Sol whispered back. "The question is what we can do about it." The council chamber was a vast circular room with seating arranged in rising tiers around a central speaking area. Han Sol had always been impressed by the room's design, which was meant to show that all species were equal in the eyes of the council. Today, however, the arrangement felt more like a courtroom with him as the defendant. Most of the council seats were filled, representatives from nearly 50 species watching as Han Sol was escorted to a small table in the center of the room. He recognized many of the faces around him, beings he had worked with on trade agreements and exploration permits. None of them would meet his eyes. Chancellor Morpheus of the Luxari rose from his elevated seat at the front of the chamber. The elderly being's normally serene expression was troubled, and his voice carried a weight of sadness as he began to speak. "Captain Han Sol, you come before this council at a time of great crisis," Morpheus said. "The Saurian Empire has issued ultimatums to several outer rim worlds, demanding territory and resources. Their battle fleets are massing at the edge of known space. In these dangerous times, the council has determined that certain species require protection." Han Sol listened carefully, noting that the Chancellor still had not provided any specific details about these supposed Saurian threats. Around the chamber, he could see other council members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Where are the other Deathworld representatives?" Han Sol asked. "Surely the Kex and Mordai ambassadors should be here for a discussion that affects their species as well." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence before Ambassador Veltar spoke up from his seat among the Etherian delegation. "The Kex, Hivemind Clictar and the Mordai resonance entity called Harmony of Stone, have already been relocated to secure facilities for their own protection. They agreed that the current situation was too dangerous for them to participate in further negotiations." "How convenient," Han Sol said quietly, though his voice carried clearly in the chamber's acoustics. "And where exactly are these secure facilities?" "The details of their location must remain classified for security reasons," Chancellor Morpheus replied. "What matters is that they are safe from Saurian aggression." Yejin, standing quietly beside Han Sol's table, had been working on her personal communicator throughout the exchange. Now she leaned down and whispered urgently in his ear. "Captain, I managed to establish a connection to our intelligence network. The Kex and Mordai aren't in protective custody. They're in detention facilities. Their communications are being jammed, and their ships have been impounded." Han Sol felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. The situation was even worse than he had feared. The council wasn't just demanding human compliance. They had already imprisoned the other Deathworld species. "Chancellor," Han Sol said, standing up from his chair. I would like to hear the specific details of these Saurian threats. What worlds have been attacked? What ultimatums have been issued? If humanity is to make an informed decision about accepting Council protection, we need to know exactly what we're being protected from. More uncomfortable shifting around the chamber. Several Council members were now whispering among themselves, and Han Sol could see that not everyone was comfortable with the situation. Ambassador Korthek of the Velani Trade Confederation stood up hesitantly. Captain Han Sol raises a valid point. Perhaps we should share more specific information about the nature of the Saurian threat. The information is classified, came a new voice from the back of the chamber. Han Sol turned to see a figure he didn't recognize, a tall being in dark robes whose species markings were hidden. Security concerns prevent us from sharing operational details. And who exactly are you? Han Sol asked. The figure didn't answer, but Chancellor Morpheus waved a hand dismissively. The representative speaks with the authority of the Council's Security Committee. Captain Han Sol, we understand your concerns, but time is running short. The Saurian Empire's ultimatum expires in 48 hours. You must make your decision now. Han Sol looked around the chamber, studying the faces of the beings who claimed to be protecting humanity. Some looked genuinely worried, others seemed uncomfortable, and a few appeared to be avoiding his gaze entirely. It was the behavior of people who knew they were doing something wrong, but felt they had no choice. What exactly are the terms of this protective relocation? Han Sol asked. Ambassador Veltar consulted a tablet in front of him. All human military vessels will be escorted to designated facilities and placed under Council protection. Civilian populations will be relocated to secure worlds where they will be safe from Saurian attack. Trade and exploration activities will be suspended until the crisis passes. And how long is this crisis expected to last? That depends on the Saurian Empire's actions, the mysterious robed figure said. It could be months, or it could be years. Han Sol nodded slowly. So humanity would give up our ships, our colonies, our freedom of movement, and in return we get the Council's promise that we'll be kept safe in prison. It's not prison, Chancellor Morpheus said quickly. It's protection. Tell that to the Keks and Mordai, Han Sol replied. Oh wait, you can't, because they're in detention facilities with jammed communications. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Several Council members turned to look at the Chancellor, clearly unaware of the true situation of the other Deathworld species. Ambassador Korthek stood again, his scaled face showing obvious distress. Chancellor, is this true? Are the Keks and Mordai being held against their will? They agreed to the relocation, Veltar said loudly. They understood the necessity of the situation. Then why are their communications jammed? Han Sol pressed. Why can't I speak with their representatives directly? The robed figure at the back of the chamber stepped forward. Captain Han Sol, you are trying the patience of this council. The decision has been made. You will comply with the relocation order, or you will be considered in violation of galactic law. Han Sol turned to face the mysterious figure directly. And what happens if I refuse? Will you send ships to force compliance? Will you attack human colonies to make us obey? If necessary, the figure replied coldly. The chamber fell silent. The threat had been made openly, in front of representatives from 50 species. This wasn't about protection anymore. It was about control. Chancellor Morpheus looked distressed. Captain, please understand we are trying to prevent a galactic war. The Saurian Empire has made it clear that they consider Deathworld species a threat to galactic stability. If we do not take action to contain this threat, they will take action themselves. So the Council's solution is to do the Saurians' work for them, Han Sol said. To imprison the very species that have fought beside you, traded with you, shared their knowledge and resources with you because some other empire finds us inconvenient. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many Council members as he could. Let me ask you something. When the Zenthari plague threatened to wipe out 3 systems, who developed the cure? When the Corvan pirates were raiding trade routes, who drove them back? When the Stellar Federation needed Resources to rebuild after the asteroid impact. Who shared their technology freely? Several council members were nodding now. The tension in the council chamber was thick enough to cut with a blade, as Chancellor Morpheus prepared to call for the final vote. Han Sol could see the uncertainty on many faces around him, beings who had been told this was about protection, but were now beginning to realize they might be participating in something far more sinister. Captain Han Sol, Chancellor Morpheus said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine regret. The Council has made its decision. You will sign the Accord of Protective Relocation, effective immediately. All human vessels will report to designated facilities within 72 hours. A holographic document appeared in the air before Han Sol, its text glowing with legal formalities that couldn't hide the simple truth underneath. By signing this accord, humanity would be giving up everything they had built in the galaxy in exchange for the promise of safety in what amounted to very comfortable prisons. The chamber fell completely silent. Representatives from 50 species watched as one human stood alone in the center of the vast room, holding the future of his entire species in his hands. Han Sol could feel the weight of every eye upon him, could sense the fear and uncertainty that filled the air like smoke. He looked at the document floating before him, reading through the carefully worded clauses that would strip away human independence. He thought about his crew aboard the Taeguk, about the colonies that had been built with human sweat and determination, about all the species that humans had helped over the years. He thought about what it meant to be from a death world, to come from a place where saying no to the universe was the difference between life and death. Han Sol reached out toward the holographic document, and every being in the chamber leaned forward to see what he would do. Instead of signing, he swept his hand through the projection, dismissing it entirely. No, he said simply. The word fell into the silence like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled representatives. Ambassador Veltar's blue skin went pale, and several council members began speaking at once in urgent whispers. No, Han Sol repeated, his voice carrying clearly throughout the chamber. Humanity refuses this accord. We will not surrender our freedom because you tell us to be afraid. Security Chief Kontal stepped forward, all four of his massive arms tensed for action. Captain, you will comply with the Council's decision, or you will be placed under arrest for violation of galactic law. Han Sol turned to face the towering, Forthak warrior without flinching. Then arrest me, but know that every being in this chamber will remember this moment. They'll remember that the Galactic Council chose to imprison the species that have fought beside them, traded with them, and died for them. You are making a mistake, the mysterious robed figure said from the back of the chamber. The Saurian Empire will not show mercy to defiant Deathworlders. You are dooming your people to destruction. Maybe, Han Sol acknowledged, but we'll face that destruction as free beings making our own choices, not as prisoners in your protective custody. Yejin had been working quietly on her communicator throughout the exchange, and now she stepped forward with urgent news. Captain, I've established contact with So Young on the Taeguk. She's been monitoring all human colonies and fleet positions. Your refusal is being broadcast across human space right now. Chancellor Morpheus looked alarmed. Captain, you cannot broadcast council proceedings without authorization. The authorization comes from the fact that this concerns human freedom, Han Sol replied. Every human in the galaxy has the right to know what choice their representatives are making. Around the chamber, other council members were receiving their own communications from their home worlds. The news of humanity's refusal was spreading rapidly, and the reactions were mixed. Some species were calling for immediate action against the defiant humans, while others were beginning to question whether the relocation order had been wise in the first place. Ambassador Korthek of the Villani stood up again, his scaled face showing clear distress. Captain Han Sol, while I admire your courage, you must consider the consequences. If the Saurian Empire does attack human worlds, the Council will not be able to help you. With respect, Ambassador, Han Sol replied, the Council isn't helping us now. You're asking us to imprison ourselves to avoid a threat that no one seems able to describe in detail. The threat is real, Ambassador Veltar insisted. Saurian, Battle fleets are gathering at the edge of their territory. Battle fleets gather and disperse all the time, Han Solo said calmly. Every major power maintains military forces. That's not the same thing as an imminent attack on Deathworld colonies. He turned to address the entire chamber, his voice growing stronger. Let me tell you what I think is really happening here. I think someone has convinced this council that Deathworld species are becoming too powerful, too independent. I think someone has used fear of the Saurian Empire as an excuse to remove us from the galactic stage before we become even more influential. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Han Solo continued speaking over them. Look at what Deathworlders have accomplished in the last decade. Humans have established more new colonies than any other species. The Keks have revolutionized asteroid mining with their hive mind coordination. The Mordai have made breakthrough discoveries in crystal-based technology. We're not a threat to galactic stability. We're contributors to galactic prosperity. Enough, the robed figure shouted. You will cease this propaganda and comply with the Council's decision. Or what? Han Solo challenged. You'll attack human worlds to force compliance? You'll start the very war you claim to be preventing? For the first time since the proceedings began, the robed figure seemed uncertain. The threat had been effective when made quietly, but saying it openly in front of the entire council was different. Ambassador Plextar of the Eldari spoke into the uncomfortable silence. The human race's valid questions about the legal basis for this emergency decree. I move that all proceedings be suspended until a full investigation can be conducted. Seconded, came voices from around the chamber. The Corvin representative, the Villani delegation, and several others were clearly having second thoughts about the entire situation. The motion is denied, Chancellor Morthias said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, Chancellor, Plexter replied, consulting his ancient legal texts again. Under Council Statute 623, any motion supported by more than 20% of the active membership must be brought to a vote. A quick count showed that nearly 30% of the council representatives had indicated support for suspending the proceedings. The legal machinery that the mysterious robed figure had been using to push through the emergency decree was starting to work against him. This is intolerable, the robed figure snarled. Captain Han Solo, you have 30 seconds to reconsider your decision, or this council will authorize the use of force against human territories. The naked threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several council members looked genuinely shocked that the situation had escalated so far, while others seemed to shrink back in their seats, as if trying to distance themselves from what was happening. Han Solo looked around the chamber one more time, seeing fear and uncertainty on most faces, but also something else. On a few faces he saw approval. Ambassador Korthek was nodding slightly, and the Corvin representative was watching him with what looked like respect. 30 seconds, Han Solo said quietly. To surrender everything my species has worked for in the galaxy. To give up our colonies, our ships, our independence because you tell us to be afraid. He paused, letting the silence stretch. No, he said again, and this time his voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Humanity chooses freedom over safety, independence over protection. We choose to stand on our own feet and face whatever comes, rather than kneel and hope for mercy. The robed figure gestured angrily at Security Chief Kontal. Arrest him. Arrest them both. But something unexpected happened. Kontal hesitated, looking around the chamber at the other council members. The Vorthak warrior had been following orders without question, but now he seemed to realize that those orders might not have the full support of the council. Security Chief, Chancellor Morthias said quietly. Perhaps we should consider the Eldari motion for investigation. There is no time for investigation, the robed figure snapped. The Saurian ultimatum expires in 48 hours. What ultimatum? Ambassador Korthek demanded. We have seen no evidence of any Saurian ultimatum. The chamber began to buzz with urgent conversations, as more and more council members realized that they had been making decisions based on information that might not be accurate. The carefully constructed crisis was starting to fall apart under the weight of simple questions. Yejin stepped closer to Han Solo and whispered urgently, Captain, I'm receiving reports from across human space. Colony governors are refusing to comply with the relocation order. Fleet commanders are moving their ships into defensive positions. Your refusal has started something. Han Sol nodded grimly. He had known that his decision would have consequences far beyond this chamber, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill down his spine. Humanity was now committed to a path that could lead to war, or to a new chapter of remembering the M. The shuttle bay of Concordia Prime was unusually busy, as Han Sol and Ye Jin made their way back to their vessel. News of the dramatic confrontation in the council chamber had spread quickly, and beings throughout the station were either hurrying to leave or gathering in small groups to discuss what they had heard. The air hummed with tension and uncertainty. Captain, Ye Jin said as they approached their shuttle. I'm detecting several ships moving into position around the station. It looks like someone is preparing to either prevent departures or provide an escort service. Han Sol paused to study the tactical display on Ye Jin's portable scanner. 3 council security vessels had taken positions near the main departure routes, while several other ships of unknown registry hung back at the edge of sensor range. Interesting, Han Sol murmured. Someone is getting nervous about how this is playing out. As they boarded their shuttle, Ye Jin's communicator chimed with an urgent message from the Taeguk. Captain, it's So Young. She says the news of your refusal has reached every human colony and fleet position in this sector. The response is significant. Han Sol settled into the co-pilot seat as Ye Jin began the departure sequence. Define significant. 17 colony governors have issued statements refusing to comply with the relocation order. 23 fleet commanders have moved their ships into defensive formations, and Captain Dong Hyun is requesting an emergency meeting of all human military officers. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, but as they cleared the station's docking bay, warning lights began flashing on the control panel. Captain, Ye Jin said with tension in her voice, we're being hailed by council security. They're ordering us to return to the station immediately. Ignore them, Han Sol said calmly. Set course for the Taeguk. Sir, they're powering up weapon systems. Han Sol looked out at the council security vessels positioning themselves to block their path. Are they actually going to shoot at a diplomatic shuttle to prevent us from leaving? The answer came in the form of a warning shot that flashed past their starboard side. The council wasn't bluffing, but they also weren't trying to destroy the shuttle. They wanted Han Sol back on the station where he could be controlled. Ye Jin, can you get us past them without starting a shooting war? The young tactical officer's fingers flew over the controls as she analyzed the positions of the council ships. Maybe, Captain, but it's going to be close. What happened next surprised everyone. As the council security vessels moved to intercept the human shuttle, 3 other ships suddenly appeared from the shadow of the station. These newcomers bore the markings of the Cathara Trading Confederation, and they moved with the purposeful precision of experienced pilots. Unknown shuttle, came a transmission on an open channel. This is Captain Velnoth of the Cathara vessel Brightwings. We are prepared to provide escort service if required. Han Sol and Ye Jin exchanged startled looks. The Cathara had never been particularly close allies of humanity, but they were respected throughout the galaxy for their fairness in trade and their commitment to honoring agreements. Brightwings, this is Captain Han Sol. We appreciate the offer, but we don't want to involve the Kithra in our dispute with the Council. Captain Han Sol, Velnoth replied. The Kithra Confederation has been watching the proceedings in the Council chamber through public broadcast. We do not appreciate seeing diplomatic immunity violated or threats made against beings acting within their legal rights. The Council security vessels found themselves in an awkward position. They had been prepared to intimidate a single human shuttle, but facing 3 well-armed Kithra ships was a different matter entirely. After a tense minute of standoff, the security vessels moved aside and allowed Han Sol's shuttle to depart with its unexpected escort. As they approached the Taeguk, Ye Jin was monitoring communications across the sector. Captain, the situation is developing faster than anyone expected. The news networks are calling it the biggest crisis in Council history. Some species are calling for immediate military action against all Deathworld colonies, but others are demanding a full investigation of the emergency decree. Han Sol docked with his ship and immediately headed for the bridge, where his crew was monitoring dozens of communications channels. The main view screen showed a tactical display of the entire sector, with human ships marked in blue and Council forces in red. What he saw made his stomach tight with worry. "So Young, report," he ordered as he took his captain's chair. "Sir, the situation is evolving rapidly," the communications officer replied. "We have confirmation that the Kex and Mordai representatives are being held in detention facilities, not protective custody as claimed. Their ships have been impounded, and their crews are under guard." Minho looked up from his science station with grim news. "Captain, I've been analyzing the supposed Saurian threat that justified this emergency decree. Based on all available intelligence, there is no evidence of any Saurian military buildup or aggressive action. Their fleets are in normal patrol positions and their diplomatic channels remain open. So the entire crisis was fabricated," Han Sol said quietly. "It appears so, sir. Someone has been feeding false information to the Council, or at least to certain Council members." Taewon stepped forward from his position near the tactical station. "Captain, we're receiving reports from human colonies across the sector. Word of your refusal has inspired others to take a stand. But that also means we're committed now. There's no backing down from this position." Han Sol nodded grimly. He had known that his decision would have far-reaching consequences, but seeing it play out in real time was sobering. "What's the status of our defensive capabilities?" "We have 17 human vessels in this sector, ranging from exploration ships like ours to colony transports and military escorts," Taewon replied. "Not exactly a battle fleet, but we can defend ourselves if necessary." "Sir," Jae-min called. "From the communications station, I'm receiving a priority transmission from Captain Dong-hyun of the Seoul. He's requesting permission to come aboard for an emergency meeting." "Granted. And Jae-min, open a channel to all human vessels in the sector. It's time we coordinated our response to this situation." Within an hour, the Taeguk's conference room was filled with human captains and commanders from across the sector. The mood was tense but determined as they discussed their options. Captain Dong-hyun, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of service, spoke first. "The situation is clear enough. The Council has tried to imprison us based on fabricated threats. The question now is what we do about it." Commander Park Jun of the Incheon raised concerns about the military implications. "If we resist openly, we could find ourselves at war with the entire Galactic Council. Humanity isn't ready for that kind of conflict." "Are we ready to live as prisoners?" Captain Lena of the Busan countered. "Because that's what they're offering us. Pretty prisons maybe, but still prisons." Han Sol listened to the debate for several minutes before speaking. The Council's emergency decree was based on false information about Saurian threats. We now have evidence that the other Deathworld species were coerced into compliance through imprisonment of their representatives. This isn't about protection, it's about control. He stood up and moved to the conference room's view screen, which showed the tactical situation across the sector. But we're not alone in questioning what's happening. The Cathara have already shown they're willing to support diplomatic immunity. Other species are demanding investigations. The Council itself is divided on this issue. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Dong-hyun asked. "I'm suggesting that we stand our ground, but we do it smart. We coordinate with the other species that are questioning the emergency decree. We gather evidence about what really happened to the Kex and Mordai. We force the truth into the open." Commander Park Jun looked skeptical. "And if the Council decides to use force to compel compliance, then we defend ourselves," Taewon said grimly, "but we make sure the galaxy knows why." The meeting continued for another hour as they planned their response. Human ships would maintain defensive positions around key colonies while diplomatic efforts continued. Intelligence gathering would focus on uncovering the truth about the supposed Saurian threat and the status of the imprisoned Deathworld representatives. As the other captains prepared to return to their ships, Han Sol received an unexpected communication. "Sir," So Young called from the bridge, "we're receiving a transmission from the Mordai Crystal City ship Harmony of Stone. The signal is weak and heavily encrypted, but they're requesting immediate assistance." Han Sol hurried to the bridge. followed by the other human commanders. On the main view screen, the image was distorted and filled with static, but they could make out the distinctive crystalline form of a Mordai entity. Human vessels. The transmission began. This is resonance of sorrow of the Mordai Confederation. We are being held against our will at coordinates. Transmission interrupted. Our agreement to relocation was coerced. Jamming increasing. Request immediate. The signal cut out entirely, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Did everyone see that? Han Sol asked. Confirmed. Captain Dong Hyun replied grimly. The Mordai are prisoners, not protected guests. That changes everything, Commander Park Jun said. The galaxy held its breath for 3 days after the Mordai transmission was broadcast across all communication networks. The desperate message from Resonance of Sorrow, begging for help while being held prisoner, had shattered the Council's carefully constructed narrative about protective relocation. Now species after species was demanding answers, and the political structure that had governed galactic civilization for centuries was beginning to crack. Han Sol stood on the bridge, Gov the Taeguk, watching the tactical display that showed the positions of hundreds of ships across the sector. What had started as a simple confrontation between humans and the Council had evolved into something far more complex. The galaxy was choosing sides, and the lines being drawn had little to do with the original emergency decree. Captain So Young reported from her communication station. We're receiving word from the Velnari battle poets. They've composed what they're calling the Epic of the Deathworlder's Refusal, and it's spreading through their entire civilization. Poetry is nice, Taewon commented dryly. But can they fight? Actually, yes, Han Sol replied with a slight smile. The Velnari don't compose battle poetry about cowards. If they're celebrating our refusal, it means they respect what we've done. Minho looked up from his science station with more significant news. Captain, I've been analyzing the intelligence data that various species have been sharing with us. The picture that's emerging is disturbing. The emergency decree wasn't just about Deathworld species. There's evidence of a broader plan to restructure the entire galactic government. Explain. The same group that pushed through the Deathworld relocation order has been quietly building support for something called the Stability Doctrine. Under this doctrine, the Council would have the authority to relocate any species deemed potentially disruptive to galactic peace. Deathworlders were just the first target. Han Sol felt a chill run down his spine. How many species would be affected? According to the preliminary plans we've uncovered, nearly a third of the galaxy's civilizations could be classified as potentially disruptive. Independent traders, militaristic cultures, rapid expansion species, technological innovators, anyone who doesn't fit the profile of a stable, controllable population. The implications were staggering. The emergency decree hadn't been about protecting Deathworld species from Saurian aggression. It had been a test run for a complete reshaping of galactic civilization. Sir, Yejin called from the tactical station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Concordia Prime. It's Chancellor Morpheus, and he's requesting private communication. Han Sol considered the request. The elderly Luxari leader had seemed genuinely conflicted during the council session, and there was a chance he was beginning to realize the true scope of what his government had been manipulated into supporting. Put him through, but record everything. The main view screen flickered to show Chancellor Morpheus in what appeared to be his private office, rather than the formal council chamber. The elderly being looked tired and worried, his luminous skin dulled with stress. Captain Han Sol, the Chancellor began, I want you to know that I have been investigating the claims made during our recent session. What I have discovered disturbs me greatly. I'm listening, Chancellor. The Saurian threat that justified our emergency decree appears to have been fabricated. Worse, I have learned that the Kex and Mordai representatives were indeed coerced into compliance through threats against their populations. This council has been manipulated into actions that violate our most fundamental principles. Han Sol nodded grimly. Who was behind the manipulation? A faction within the council that calls itself the Order of Galactic Stability. They have been working for years to concentrate power in the hands of what they consider the most reliable species. Your refusal to comply with their plan has exposed their activities to scrutiny they cannot survive. What happens now? Chancellor Morthias was quiet for a moment, his 4 eyes reflecting deep concern. The Council is in chaos. 17 species have withdrawn their support for the emergency decree. 23 others are demanding full investigations. The Order's supporters are calling for immediate military action to restore what they call proper authority. And what do you call for, Chancellor? I call for justice, the elderly leader replied firmly. I am hereby dissolving Emergency Decree 7749 and ordering the immediate release of all Deathworld representatives and their crews. Furthermore, I am calling for a full investigation into the Order of Galactic Stability and their manipulation of Council proceedings. The transmission ended, leaving Han Solo's bridge crew in stunned silence. The political earthquake they had started was reshaping the entire galaxy, and they were only beginning to see the scope of the changes. Captain, Jamin called urgently from communications. We're receiving transmissions from across the sector. The Chancellor's announcement is triggering responses from dozens of species. Show me. The main view screen split into multiple smaller displays, each showing a different species representative making announcements to their populations. The Kithra were publicly declaring their support for the investigation and offering sanctuary to any beings fleeing persecution. The Corvan Confederation was mobilizing their merchant fleets to assist with humanitarian aid. Even some of the more cautious species were issuing statements supporting diplomatic solutions over military action, but not everyone was pleased with the developments. Sir, Yejin reported with concern in her voice, I'm detecting significant military movement in the Saurian border regions. Multiple battle fleets are moving toward Council space. The real Saurian Empire is taking advantage of the chaos, Han Solo realized. They're moving while the Council is paralyzed by internal conflict. It gets worse, Minho added. I'm receiving reports that the Order of Galactic Stability is claiming that the Council's collapse proves their point about the need for stronger central authority. They're calling for emergency powers to deal with the Saurian threat. Han Solo understood immediately. They created a fake crisis to justify imprisoning Deathworld species. Now they're using the real crisis that resulted from their manipulation to justify even more extreme measures. What do we do, Captain? So Young asked. Han Solo looked around his bridge at the crew that had followed him through this crisis. They had started by refusing to accept imprisonment, and now they found themselves at the center of a struggle for the future of galactic civilization. We do what Deathworlders have always done, he said finally. We stand up to bullies. We protect those who can't protect themselves, and we prove that freedom is worth fighting for. Over the next few days, the galaxy watched in amazement as the crisis transformed into something unprecedented. The Kex hive mind entity Click-Tar, freed from detention, immediately began coordinating with human forces to share intelligence about Order activities. Resonance of Sorrow of the Mordai used their crystal-based technology to create unhackable communication networks for the growing coalition of species opposing the Order. The 3 Deathworld species that had been targeted for imprisonment became the core of something new, a mutual defense compact that welcomed any species willing to stand up for themselves and others. The Kithara joined first, followed quickly by the Corvan Confederation, the Velnari battle poets, and dozens of smaller civilizations that had grown tired of being pushed around by larger powers. Captain Dong Hyun, now serving as military coordinator for the growing alliance, established joint training programs where human tactics were combined with Kex hive mind coordination and Mordai crystalline technology. The results were impressive enough to give even the Saurian Empire pause. Captain, In-Young reported from the intelligence station that had been hastily set up on the Taeguk. We're receiving word that the Order of Galactic Stability has suffered major defections. Apparently, many of their supporters joined because they genuinely believed in the Saurian threat. When they learned it was fabricated, they withdrew their backing. What about the real Saurian threat? That's the interesting part. When faced with a united coalition of Deathworld and allied species, the Saurian Empire agreed to return to the negotiating table. Apparently, They preferred dealing with predictable opponents to fighting an alliance of unpredictable Deathworlders. Han Solo smiled at that. The Saurians had built their strategy around intimidating individual species and exploiting divisions between council members. They had no idea how to handle an alliance of beings who had learned to say no to superior force and mean it. 6 months later, Han Solo stood in the observation deck of the new starbase that had been constructed in the Kepler system. The same system where this crisis had begun. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see ships from dozens of species working together on joint projects. Human colony ships were being escorted by Kex patrol craft, while Mordai research vessels shared data with Cathara explorers. "Remarkable," said a familiar voice behind him. Han Solo turned to see Ambassador Plextar of the ancient Eldari, the being whose knowledge of council law had helped expose the illegal nature of the emergency decree. "What's remarkable, Ambassador?" "That it took a simple word, no, to change the course of galactic history," the elderly being replied. "For centuries, species have accepted decision